Hi, welcome to Chapter 11, Introduction to Ethics. Uh, the chapter is abortion, and it is one of the most polarizing issues that is facing our nation today. And so it is always a very interesting discussion in class. Now here, it won't be much of a discussion. I'll just go through the lecture. If you have questions, you can email me, you can call me, as always. But let's begin Chapter 11. In the last chapter, issues of when life ends were controversial, but have tended to settle medically, at least around the establishment of brain death, or have they? In this chapter, some of the arguments for and against abortion revolve around when life, personhood, or the ascription of moral life begins. Now, if the brain is used again as a guide, then the development of the brain is crucial. There is a kind of stalemate affecting each of the positions and currently some of the rights and freedoms that were established in the 70s by Roe v. Wade, and these are being whittled away. Abortion touches on some of the toughest moral issues of all, especially regarding the question of when life begins and the values that we give to lives. Now, it's interesting because even as I'm filming this video, certain state legislatures are passing very stringent abortion laws. Now, love it or hate it, we're going to have to deal with it. Thoreau talks about freedoms being eroded away. Other people would argue that life is actually being protected. But at any rate, that's the chapter. And over the years, I have read so many term papers on abortion, and that is why I have said no term papers on abortion. Any topic but abortion, please. Well, first of all, introduction to the abortion issue. We're going to need to define some terms. Abortion is the premature termination of pregnancy. Now, for those of you in the nursing track, you understand that a spontaneous abortion is a miscarriage. An induced abortion is caused when the woman herself or another, usually a physician, will perform an abortion. And an induced abortion, when we say abortion, generally that's what we mean. We mean an induced abortion. Now, a zygote is a cell or a group of cells that results from a union of sperm and egg cells. An embryo is a term used to describe the conceptus between the 2nd and 8th weeks of gestation. Fetus is a term used to describe the conceptus from the 8th week onward until birth. Now, Thoreau uses the term conceptus. I like the term conceptus, but I'm very surprised because generally people who are pro-abortion are going to prefer the term fetus. And I would have assumed that Thoreau would have preferred the term fetus. But conceptus is a term that he uses in the textbook. And that term implies that life is present from conception. And as you'll see, if you've read the chapter, you know that Thoreau has come to the conclusion that life is certainly present, but what type of life? And he differentiates between sentient life, and so that's why he's comfortable using the term conceptus. The term child is normally used after the conceptus is born. So once the child is born, it's no longer a fetus or a conceptus, it is a person. Conceptus, again, is a neutral term that means that which has been conceived, although I would argue that it is not necessarily a neutral term. I try to avoid using it when teaching, because I don't believe it's neutral. I try not to come down on either side of the issue. I try to simply teach pro and pro-abortion and con-abortion. Um, but that's what the text says. It says that it is a neutral term, that which has been conceived. Viability is the period of pregnancy somewhere between the 26th and 28th weeks when the conceptus is considered able to survive outside the mother's womb. That's what we call viability. Amniocentesis is the procedure that can be performed after the 16th week to reveal information like gender and possible deformities. Now, amniocentesis is considered an invasive procedure, which means there are some risks to the pregnancy, and you are offered, do you want to have an amniocentesis or not? That is completely your choice. Let's see, what else? Two basic principles come to conflict in relation to abortion. This is why it is so polarizing. We have two extreme positions. Both are important to each and every one of us. I don't care which side of the position you fall on, both are important. The value of life principle and the principle of individual freedom. You can't tell me that if you are pro-abortion that you do not value life. And you can't tell me that if you are pro-life that you do not value individual freedom. If we look at it this way, we're probably able to understand each other's positions a lot better. Because the fact of the matter is, both of these are very important. And as we've learned up to this point in the course, what do we do when we have different duties? Here we have conflicting duties. Which is the strongest duty? I can't answer that for you. I'm not. Yeah, my cat's in the background. It's Pumpkin. She wants to look out the window. So which is a stronger duty? Now, everything that we have studied, again, up to this point, has certain difficulty in resolving conflicts. If you remember, that was a huge weakness that fell within Kant's system, and Ross tried to solve it, but, again, who determines which duty is stronger? Now, the legal status of abortion in the United States. Abortion has gone through various stages of acceptance and rejection in American history. In 1973, the Supreme Court essentially made abortion legal in the first 2 trimesters, but allowed states to forbid abortion in the 3rd trimester, except in the case of a serious threat to the life of the mother. Now, again, they didn't say that you couldn't have an abortion, the Supreme Court, in the 3rd trimester. They said that's up to the states to decide. Recently, there have been several states that have passed laws, one that says that if you can detect a fetal heartbeat, then you may not have an abortion. And that's pretty early in the pregnancy. So that directly butts up against Roe v. Wade. And where is that going to fall? I believe that, like when South Dakota outlawed abortions, I believe it'll end up being overturned. But at any rate, in 1800, according to Thoreau, abortion was tolerated. I'm not sure that he's correct, except, we didn't have the internet, we didn't have forms of communication, and so when he says tolerated, what he really means is it wasn't addressed. No one spoke about it. The church still said you cannot do it, but they turned a blind eye. In 1900, it was banned in every state up until 1973. Now, in July 1989, in Webster v. Reproductive Health Services, the court allowed states to put some restrictions on abortion when federal and state funds were used and did away with the trimester system. And so, bingo, that's exactly where we're at right now. But still, I don't see how, well, we're just going to have to wait and see what the courts rule. In July 92, in Planned Parenthood v. Casey, the court allowed further restrictions while at the same time upholding a woman's right to choice, basically saying absolutely nothing. Yeah, we allow more restrictions, but we also allow a woman's right to choice. Well, great. What does that mean? You've said two things that conflict with one another. So, where do we stand? Legality of abortion based on the trimester approach, that's still what we most often talk about. In the first trimester, at least in this jurisdiction, it's permitted without exception. Again, in North Dakota, right now, not after a fetal heartbeat is detected. In the second trimester, it is permitted, but with certain restrictions, and in the third, it's prohibited with restrictions, the health of the mother being very important. So, those are the nuts and bolts, but the question of questions, when does human life begin? Now, one point, life is present from conception. And from this point on, it develops into key stages. All life starts from an egg the size of a period at the end of a sentence. By the third week, the embryo is developing various parts. By the fourth week, its heart begins to beat. Now, that's the first trimester, and that is when, North Dakota is saying no. By the fifth week, divisions of the brain occur, and the fetus is developing eyes and limb buds appear. By the sixth week, it's about half an inch long. Its eyes are still on the sides of its head, and it's developing slits where its mouth and nose will be. By the end of the seventh week, sexual characteristics can be discerned, and the face is mammalian, but somewhat, pig-like. By the end of the eighth week, the face resembles a primate's. There is some lower brain activity, some lower brain anatomy, and the fetus has reflex actions. By the fifth month, the mother can feel the fetus move. Lungs begin to develop during the sixth month, and human brain activity begins at about the seventh month. Brain waves with regular patterns typical of adult humans begin only at about the 30th week of pregnancy. So again, just a summation of the last four slides. Life is present from conception, according to the text, but there may be different point at which such a life can be considered human. So that is how Dr. Thoreau deals with the issue. He says, yes, there's life, but is it human life? What is it if it's not human life? Is it a cat? The concept passes through various stages of development. The closer to viability, the more human it becomes. Again, at least according to Dr. Thoreau. It's difficult to state that in the earlier stages, according to Dr. Thoreau again, the life is fully human. It's equally difficult to state that after the 12th week, that this is not an actual human life. Interesting, the conclusions that he is able to come to. Now, we're going to look at some arguments for and some arguments against. Arguments against abortion, first of all, believes in the genetic view of the beginning of human life, that human life begins at conception. The difference there between Thoreau's definition and what he's listed here is he acknowledges that life begins at conception, but is it a human life? Well, here the argument is yes, it's a human life. And so that is an argument against abortion. It's human life. And then the sanctity of human life. The right to life is absolute, especially the right of an innocent unborn life. Every unborn child must be regarded as a human person with all the rights of a person from the moment of conception on. Then there's the domino argument. And again, every chapter we talk about the domino argument, many times within each chapter. One proof of its validity is cited by pro-life groups is that Hitler started his history of atrocities by legalizing abortion. Abortion is both medically and psychologically harmful to women. And again, when we look at the other side of the argument, they will have the argument stated in the inverse, that it is not medically or psychologically harmful. But this argument states that it is. The danger of pregnancy to a mother's life is almost non-existent because of medical and technological advances. Then there's the alternative to abortion argument, that there are viable alternatives to abortion: adoption, child welfare agencies, and then the argument that says economics cannot be taken into consideration when human life is concerned. In other words, the argument, well, I simply can't afford a child now, isn't valid when you're dealing with a human life. And then there's the argument that says that women must accept full responsibility for their sexual activities. The other side of that coin is, well, wait a minute. It's true that women must accept responsibility, but what about the male? Men can just disappear. And so, at any rate, this is the argument against. But again, we'll rehash this on the other side. Innocent life cannot be sacrificed because of carelessness or indiscretion. Rape or incest usually do not present problems because contraceptives can often be used in time. In other words, this is the extreme abortion position, which says that abortion should not be allowed under any circumstances except possibly the life and health of the mother. Usually when states pass these bans, they include rape and incest, but this argument would say, well, it's usually not a problem because contraceptives often can be used in time. Now, the inverse of that would be, of course, often isn't always. When they can't, however, even such means of conception, according to this theory, do not justify the taking of innocent lives. Now, arguments for abortion. First of all, individual freedom. Women have absolute rights over their bodies, and the conceptus is part of the woman's body until birth. Then the argument, a conceptus cannot be considered human life until birth. Unwanted, deformed children should not be brought into the world. Abortion is more responsible than burdening society. Abortion is a no-risk medical procedure. Medical and psychological problems are much greater for women who go through pregnancies than for those who have abortions. And the domino argument used by pro-life groups is not supported by hard evidence. Hitler's overall motives for permitting abortions were not at all the same as the motives of today's women. Pregnancies resulting from rape and incest should never have to be gone through by any woman because of the horror of the circumstances of conception. Women do have responsibilities for their sexual activities, and having abortions when necessary is part of these responsibilities, according to this argument. Abortion is and must be totally a matter of the woman's choice, else no one else should be able to interfere. Now, there are more moderate positions and more stringent positions. More moderate positions on abortions. The strong pro-life and pro-choice positions present an unresolvable conflict of absolutes, and that's an absolute fact. As I said in the beginning of this lecture, you've got two extreme positions, and they are unable to come to terms because one says, listen, we acknowledge that you have rights over your body. However, the stronger duty here is to protect the innocent fetus, which also has rights. And the other side says, well, wait a minute. It's my body. It's my choice. And you have no right to tell me what to do. So there is no absolute right to life, even though the value of life principle is important. That is the pro-abortion position. And then the pro-life position would be there is also no absolute right over one's body and life, even though it is a strong right. And so, again, we are right back where we started. Where does life begin? That is the question that the outcome needs to resolve on. Now, I would also like to say the law has stepped in and answered the question of when life begins. When they began to prosecute for double murder in the case of the killing of a pregnant mother. And in California, they set legal precedent by charging double murder. Now, pro-abortion people were up in arms when that happened because now the law has answered the question. When does life begin? Well, if you're charged with murder of the mother and the child, that answers that question. But does it answer the question sufficiently? And are we bound in all cases by one or two precedents? That's the question. Now, the more moderate position on abortion, the problem of when life begins may be considered through a synthesis. The pro-life position draws the line for when life begins too early, at least they say. And the pro-abortion position draws the line for when life begins too late, according to the pro-life people. So the moderate favors for the developmental view of when life begins, which states that life does indeed begin at conception, but it gains value as it develops through the gestation period. Again, the longer it is developing, the closer to human life it becomes. Now, again, we're right back to where we started. The purpose of this course is not to get anyone to change their position, but it is to get you to look at the other side's position. I'm sure everyone that's watching this is either pro-life or pro-choice. And my purpose here is not to change your position, but merely to get you to look at both sides. Well, that is chapter 11. There's so much more to this issue. There's so much research and so much thought that each and every one of you needs to put into where you come down on this position. But that's it for now. Have a great afternoon, and I will see you with chapter 12 fairly shortly.